This week, one of our devotional passages was Luke chapter 20, verses 19 to 26. And in this passage, there's a really famous set of words from Jesus that are tremendously relevant, whose implications are really great. And I think they really speak to some of the things that I think we as Christians in America today are wrestling with or maybe fearful about. And I want to share with you some thoughts about that. So let me just first go over Luke 20:19 through 26. And it's really good to hear it in context. It goes like this. The scribes and the chief priests sought to lay hands on him at that very hour. So that on him is Jesus. For they perceived that he had told this parable against them, but they feared the people. So prior to this is a parable of the wicked tenants. And they're right. Jesus did speak that parable explicitly against the Jewish leaders and the elites in the hierarchy of that time. All right. So verse 20. So they, that's the chief priests, scribes, watched him, Jesus, and sent spies who pretended to be sincere that they might catch him in something he said so as to deliver him up to the authority and jurisdiction of the governor. So what they're trying to do is use political power, and they're trying to catch him in something he's saying and trap him. So the context is actually really quite dangerous. It's you say the wrong thing, and you could be run afoul of powerful people, and your life could actually be in danger. And so there are these sneaky people who have a really evil, nefarious agenda against Jesus, and they are deliberately trying to get him to say something that will get him in political trouble. So here we go. So keep that in mind. This is the context. Verse 21. So they asked him, Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly and show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God. Okay, that's what they said. It's just so rife with irony, because what they say is very much true about Jesus, but they say it in such a kind of gross, sneaky, lying way that really has a horrible underhanded agenda. And then they ask, now here's where we get into the part that's famous. They ask this very, very famous question, verse 22. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? That's the question. This is the trap. Is it lawful for us to give tribute to Caesar or not? Verse 23. But Jesus perceived their craftiness and said to them, Show me a denarius. That's a Roman coin. Whose likeness and inscription does it have? They said, Caesar's. He said to them, Then render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. That's the famous verse. Tremendously famous verse. Even non-Christians all around the world and in America, a lot of your friends, if they're educated Americans, even if they don't believe in Jesus, they know this phrase. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Luke chapter 23, verse 25. And then just to finish up the passages. And they were not able in the presence of the people to catch him in what he said, but marveling at his answer, they became silent. This answer really shut them up. Now, in this video, what I want to do is offer the first of four important implications that I want to share, reflections on these important words. And the first one is this. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, and to God's that which is God's. I want to just first share with you what it does is it presents to you a complex picture of what it means that how God reigns over us, the kingdom of God. The kingdom of God is how God is king, how God sends a king. This is Jesus, of course, to reign over us in the world, and that Jesus brings the kingdom of God into the world. And yet he says there's things that you are to render to God, that you owe to God, and there are things you should render to Caesar that you rightfully should give to Caesar. And I want you to think about that complexity, that there's a way that we give to God which is God's, but then we still owe to our neighbors, to our government. And understand, the Jews considered Caesar a wicked and oppressive, form of authority. That wasn't kidding. He really was a wicked and unjust and oppressive form of authority. So to the government, the state at its time, but yet Jesus was wicked and unjust, and yet Jesus says, you should still give to them what you owe them. And so think about the complexity of this. That means a couple things here. Let me just unpack this a little bit. The kingdom of God is not primarily about state power in this time. Power, coercive power, gaining and grasping after power is not where the kingdom of God goes. That should not be something that Christians think is so important. There may be reasons why we seek power in this world, but almost always when we seek power in the world, from the Bible's point of view, it is to seek that which is truly just, especially the weak and the downtrodden, to help them, the poor, the weak, and the downtrodden, receive greater justice and to receive mercy in the society. But it shouldn't be for ourselves. But even then, here's some other things I want to say about this. In the world, people usually want power because this is a critique of certain, the typical ways that people tend to think. That the secular people today tend to think that you have to get justice, and justice have to be today. This is the only way we can have, and that we must establish our power, our kingdom, our state. So they love grasping after the powers of the state. They want to become Caesar to impose their vision of righteousness and justice, and it has to happen. And so that's a blood fight. They got to get that. But there's another, and so here, when you say to render the things that are to God, the things that are God, and things, Jesus says, you don't have to think like that. In fact, don't think like that. And another critique, there's another set of people, well, let's call them theocracy. The people who believe that their God must reign on this earth. So they're secular people, their righteousness and their justice must reign on this earth, and then that's the grasp after power. Then there are people who have a theology, they have a religious vision that their God thinks that you must reign this. But our God, Jesus, says, no, there's things that you should do to God, but you know what? Even though Caesar may be unjust and cruel, you still owe him. That's incredible. That's really, really powerful. And inside, so the vision of the kingdom of God through the gospel, through Jesus, is really neither swallowed up through a secular, the world is everything, or God tells you must have power, and the kingdom of God must be only if we're in control, a kind of theocracy, but really a third way. It's a third, more interesting and important and complex way. And so, some important implications of this. Number one, we can be patient, knowing that our neighbors will tend to be, secular total, to grasp after total power through secularism, or total power through a kind of theocratic religiosity. So, in the world, you have, say, Muslims who operate this way. And of course, we have, in history, there's been communists. There's a powerful secular grasp after power in the progressive left today. And as we are Christians today, we could understand that about our neighbors and not be so angry. We can offer a third way, and we can have patience, and we can still have joy, and we can live inside of hope. Because our hope is not who wins elections or who is in power. Our hope is in a king whose ultimate authority is greater than the authority of Caesar, even though we will still give what we owe Caesar. And I want to offer something else. We can also not only be humble, but also courageous. So what we want to do is we want to be humble. We did this camp, or we could disagree did this camp, but we don't have to be in your face about it, or self-righteous, or angry about them about it. We can be humble, and yet firm, and yet courageous. We're courageous, joyful, hopeful. And it all flows out of this interesting and yet strange, and to other people's ears, very strange. It's like it doesn't make sense to this complex way, a third way that Jesus offers to render to God the things that are God, and to Caesar the things that are Caesar's.